Myanmar has a rich history, a historic civilization with more than its fair share of troubles. We are at the beginning of a new chapter for Myanmar. As Myanmar looks up to a new dawn, it looks in the direction of its leaders to take it down the best path. In this video policy clip prepared just for your eyes and ears, Mr. President, we examine how corruption could derail the new Myanmar story. We examine how other countries world over have tried to attack corruption. After carefully considering the present situation in Myanmar, we present to you a set of concrete recommendations on how to chip away at this cancer which eats our society. Myanmar used to be a relatively rich country in the early part of 1900s, but we fell upon hard times. Today, we have the opportunity to catch up. Investors are knocking on the door, and the citizens are hopeful of change. However, we are at the risk of being held back by pervasive corruption that ails us today. According to Transparency International, Myanmar is perceived to be one of the most corrupt countries in the world today. There are many examples of widespread corruption. There are farmers protesting against land grabs, corruption in the legal system, and the telecom scandal. And these implications are long-term. Corruption could hold us back from achieving the kind of economic growth that Myanmar is capable of. We get less foreign direct investments than we otherwise would have. It slows down inflow of aid and prevents us from achieving our target of inclusive growth. Revenue leakage means that the government finances are weaker than they should. Equally concerning is the erosion of faith in public institutions caused by corruption. It hurts the pillars of democracy which we are trying to nurture. While economic costs are easy to estimate, the social impact might be more difficult to measure. Corruption has a demoralizing impact on societies and results in discontent and instability. We interviewed many young Burmese to hear their aspirations for Myanmar. Let's listen to one of them.
ကျွန်တော်မြန်မာလူငယ်တယောက်အနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော်ကျွန်တော်ဒီနိုင်ငံကြီးကိုကျွန်တော်တကယ်ပဲလက်စားမှုကင်းလို့တဲ့နိုင်ငံအဖြစ်ကျွန်တော်အနေနဲ့တွေ့ချင်တယ်ဒါကကျွန်တော်လူငယ်တယောက်ရဲ့အိမ်မက်ပဲဘာလို့လဲဆိုတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့နိုင်ငံကြီးကပြောင်းလဲလာတာကတိတ်လည်းမကြသေးဘူးတကယ်ပဲကျွန်တော်တို့ကဘာလီပြောင်းလဲလာပြီလဲဆိုတိတိကျကျကြည့်ရင်တော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ကဘာမှရည်ရရတော့မတွေ့သေးဘူးပေါ့နော်တကယ်ပဲကျွန်တော်တို့လက်စားမှုကင်းလို့တဲ့ဒီနိုင်ငံဖြစ်အောင်ဖြစ်မယ်ဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့တကယ်ပဲအစိုးရဌာနတင်မဟုတ်တကယ်အောက်ခြေလူတန်းစားအဆင့်ပါကျွန်တော်တို့ပြောင်းလဲဖို့လိုအပ်တာပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒါကကျွန်တော်ဒီလူငယ်တယောက်အနေနဲ့တကယ်ပဲညှော်မှန်းတဲ့ဒီစန္ဒတစ်ခုဖြစ်ကြောင်းကိုကျွန်တော်အနေနဲ့ပြောချင်တယ်
Deep-rooted and pervasive corruption is like a cancer. A weak response could end up denying the next generation of Burmese the opportunities they truly deserve. Mr. President, before we dive into our recommendations, it's important for us to understand the deep-rooted causes that underlie corruption. Academic research tells us that corruption is highly correlated with high levels of regulation and red tape. Bureaucratic discretion and conflicts of interest often result in cases of collusion between public officials and interested parties. Lack of transparency and accountability helps such corruption to stay hidden and away from public scrutiny. Low salaries paid to public officials also often tend to push them down the path of corruption. So, it is not surprising that countries have tackled corruption by hitting at exactly these root causes. Their approaches and specific measures of course vary depending on the context of the country, but the general principles can be distilled to a few. First, these countries have strengthened anti-corruption watchdogs. They have reduced conflict of interest. They are now made accountable to the public. They have reduced bureaucratic discretion. They have increased transparency in their processes. And last but not least, they have engaged their citizens a lot more. We attach a link to the mind maps made for this video, which you can consult at a later stage for more details. Mr. President, before we recommend specific measures to address corruption, we examine the context for drawing up anti-corruption policies. Your biggest strength is your personal commitment to bringing about change. Next, the ratification of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and the setting up of new government bodies like the Anti-Corruption Committee are the right steps to tackle corruption. However, you do face a divided political base and weak institutions. Elites have a strong influence over legal and regulatory bodies, and the government also has limited financial resources. The opportunities that you are presented with include a democratic mandate and an international community that is eager to support reform in Myanmar today. However, we have to acknowledge that it will be a challenge to garner support from Parliament for stronger anti-corruption rules. Even more daunting is changing the existing mindset of the legislators. Next, we have considered the various approaches employed to tackle corruption world over. Bearing in mind the earlier mentioned considerations specific to Myanmar, we distilled 3 key strategies to fight corruption. We understand your political constraints with power struggles within your party. We note you proposed 12 revisions in the anti-corruption bill, but only 2 of those were accepted by the Parliament. Mr. President, even though you only have 2 years left to the next elections, we advise you to set the stage for the longer haul. In this fight against corruption, you need to bring on board like-minded legislators. We advise you to pick 3 or 5 most promising and trustworthy legislators whose integrity and incorruptibility you do not doubt. Groom them to be your successors and to continue with your change agenda. Empower them by putting them in charge of key decision-making government bodies, like the Ministry for National Planning and Economic Development. The next step is to reform our public sector to improve transparency, accountability, and to import best practices that are relevant to Myanmar's context in tackling corruption. Finally, we recommend that you support steps which empower civil society and lend them belief and a platform to voice their concerns. These include relaxing press censorship and protecting press freedom by law. Mr. President, these are just 3 strategies, but we believe they will be the best for Myanmar to pursue at this early stage of its transition. By addressing corruption early, you will lay the groundwork for Myanmar to achieve its true potential. To end off, we leave you with the same message from our young friend, Mr. Yecho.
တကယ်ပဲတကယ်အောက်ခြေလူတန်းစားအဆင့်ပါကျွန်တော်တို့ပြောင်းလဲဖို့လိုအပ်တာပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒါကကျွန်တော်ဒီလူငယ်တယောက်အနေနဲ့တကယ်ပဲညှော်မှန်းတဲ့ဒီစန္ဒတစ်ခုဖြစ်ကြောင်းကိုကျွန်တော်အနေနဲ့ပြောချင်တယ်